All right, welcome. Emergency Medical Responder, Chapter 5. We're going to be covering communications and documentation. So let's get started. All right, communications are important during every phase of the call. You've got to be a good communicator as an emergency medical responder. Specifically, the dispatcher must communicate the location and type of call to the responder so you're getting good information. And then you, as an emergency medical responder, need to communicate with your patients, bystanders, family members, dispatchers, and members of the public safety community in a very effective manner. After the call, you also are going to have to document the condition of the patient and all the treatment that you gave. All right, so data and communication systems, one of two. The purpose of communication system is send information from one location to another, and what's in a possible, basically another form of communication when it's possible to communicate by face-to-face. The results of using communication system will be only as accurate as the information that's put into the system. So, good data in, good data out. Bad data in, bad data out, so on and so forth in. So you need to make sure that you're communicating effectively. It's only as good as you as the instigator of the communication. All right, so communication system can be divided into two categories. The first one, obviously, those that transmit voice communications and those that transmit data. Voice communication systems, one of three. These transmit the spoken word from one location to another, primarily radio systems. Now, radio systems, they're regulated by one entity that's a federal entity. It's called the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC. What the FCC does is they assign frequencies to the organizations throughout the United States so everybody has their own channel of their own frequencies or set of sub-frequencies that they can speak on. Without somebody controlling all that, it would be chaos. I mean, we would be talking all over the top of each other if it was just a free-for-all for people to be able to communicate. All right, so types of radios, you have base station, mobile radios, portable radios, and a repeater. As you can see here, this firefighter here, or this first responder, should I say, first firefighter, is using a portable radio. Telephone systems, they're primarily to send voice communications back and forth between two or more people. Landline phone systems tied together through an above ground or below ground hardwired system is a part of that. And then mobile phones, they rely on radio waves between a mobile phone and a cellular tower to send and receive phone messages. A lot better than smoke signals, a lot better than just the 400 band radios. In our era, some of us older paramedics, cell phones didn't exist. There was no such thing. I remember my first cell phone back in the early 80s was this huge bag that had what looked like a regular phone receiver in it. It was very, very heavy, had a big battery. It plugged into your car cigarette lighter and that kind of stuff. So they've come a long ways over the years. Data systems. Data can be transmitted through radio phones or the internet. Data is very, very important. It tells us how to get to the call. Obviously, when we use data in our terminals for patient care records, it gives us good information. Also, you can have paging systems that can transmit text messages or voice communications if you're still using that kind of communications. And then you can have these mobile data terminals that can actually be plugged into your ambulance that can get you to the call. Fax machines use phone lines or radio systems to send written data. Telemetry is used by our advanced life support providers, and what they do is they transmit our EKGs to the hospital or to a medical control center so they can be read or confirmed. The paramedic reads it first, and then they're confirmed by the medical personnel. And then digital messaging to include email, text messages, and social media can be used to transmit a wide variety of messages. Right, so functions of a radio communications, one of 9. First is dispatch. Dispatch may be voice, text messaging, or an MDT alert to responders to an emergency. It is your responsibility to keep your equipment ready to receive a call when you're on duty. So whether you're using a portable radio, a cellular phone, a pager device, texting, whatever it is, you have to be prepared to receive that and be ready on all times when you're on duty. If you're not sure that all the information has been received correctly, ask the dispatcher. Get the information. If you have more questions, ask the dispatcher to repeat it, or if there's any more information, to please relay it while you're en route to the call. All right, so response to the scene. Learn how to use maps or GPS systems, how to get you there. We have such wonderful technology these days that helps us to get from one place to another, but you can also get information from the dispatcher. Now, if you're delayed for some reason or encounter something, you need to notify the dispatch. One of the biggest causes of delays are trains. You can't get past a train. Once you're blocked from getting to the other side of that train to get to your call, you need to notify dispatch as soon as possible. All right, so arrival of the scene. You now have arrived. You need to visually survey the scene. It's called a windshield survey. You're looking through the windshield and see if there's anything that is unsafe. And if there is, you need to report it. So give Communications Center a brief verbal description when you're looking through that windshield. Location and the type of incident that you're on scene, any hazards present, number of patients, and any additional assistance required. You need to ask for this early. Okay, get help on the way. You don't want to be the only one sitting there trying to deal with a scene. All right, so updating responding EMS units. So you're on scene and you need to update units that are coming to you. Your report should include age and sex of the patients and patients if you have multiples, their general chief complaint, their level of consciousness, and the status of their airway, breathing, and circulation. Now, once they get there, you're going to transfer care over to the EMS personnel. You need to provide EMTs and paramedics with a very short report or a simple report. It's called a handover or handoff report. Whether it's written or whether it's verbal, you need to give it to them of anything that you have done for your patient and what you found the patient to be at. So that transferring of care, that same approach you're following during your patient assessment, you're providing to them your handoff report to include age, sex of the patient, brief history of the incident, patient's chief complaint, patient's level of responsiveness, and anything that's changed while they were in your care, and describe how you found the patient when you first arrived. Also, any patient assessment. Report the status of any vital signs, their airway, breathing, and circulation. Anything that you've done as far as physical exam. Report any pertinent medical condition using the sample format, SAMPLE. S, okay, is signs and symptoms. A is allergies. M is medications. P is past medical history. L is last meal. And E is events leading prior to. So you're going to ask the question, what were you doing before this happened? And then report any interventions provided, to the patient, that you've done for them. Tell them, and what you did and what the patient's response was. Online medical control is generally used by EMTs and paramedics to secure permission to perform certain skills and then get direction regarding the patient care. So give the patient care reports to the hospital, if you're a part of that transport piece of it. Anything that's pertinent to that to the patient that's written in written form is going to be given to the hospital ultimately. Post-run activities. After you turned over the care of your patient, you need to report on your status to your communications center. Tell them I'm back in service again. Then let communications center know how long it will take you to get your unit ready for service. If it needs some, you need to resupply, those kind of things. You can usually get your supplies from the agency that you work with, that's on scene. All right, so this is in your book. Table 5-1 is guidelines for effective radio communication. Verbal communications. Effective communication means the person receiving the message understands exactly what the person who sent the message meant. It needs to be effective, and you need to, provide feedback. Okay, the receiver needs to communicate to the sender that the message has been received and understood. Both external and internal distractions can negatively affect communication. So be sure to eliminate any kind of distractions before you start giving a radio report or before you start talking to somebody and giving them important information. External stuff could be noise or the use of electronic devices, and internal stuff could be letting yourself think about a personal matter while you're on scene trying to give information. All right, so some guidelines. communicating with patients. So how do we communicate with people? First off, when you introduce or you first meet your patient, introduce your name. Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm a paramedic. I'm here to help you. What is your name? And then you're going to use it. And make sure that you're maintaining eye contact during the entire process. Use language that the patient can understand. Don't talk in medical terms or jargon, that kind of stuff. And speak slow. These patients are sick. They're ill. They don't want you speaking, at 100 miles an hour where they can't understand what you're trying to ask them. So be very compassionate. Always give them your name first and then ask them their name. Ask them if they know where they're at. Ask them if they know what time it is. You're trying to establish what their alertness is, and do so very respectfully. All right, tell the truth always and allow time for the patient to respond. Limit the number of people talking with the patient because it will do nothing but confuse them. Also, be aware of your body language. Don't stand inappropriately. Don't cross your arms, that kind of stuff. You want to be very receptive to your patient. Act and speak in a very calm and confident manner. Respect the cultural norms of the patient. People have different cultural norms. You need to understand what they are and be respectful of those. Use open-ended questions and close-ended questions appropriately. And then treat all patients as if they were members of your own family. Make them feel comfortable. If you can't make them feel comfortable, they're not going to trust you and their care is not going to go very well. Right, so patients with special needs and how to communicate with them. There are plenty of folks out there that have special needs. First ones could be hard of hearing or they're deaf. You need to identify yourself by showing your patient your patch or your badge. Be careful about touching patients. Make sure it's acceptable, but touch the patient. It makes them feel comfortable. If it doesn't, back off. You're going to have to play that one on your own, whatever that patient's level of space comfortability is. Face the patient when you speak so he or she can see your lips and facial expressions because many of them do read lips. Speak slowly and distinctly. Don't shout at them, okay? Watch the patient's face for expressions of understanding or uncertainty. You may have to clarify and work your way through this. You very well can write something down so that they can see it, and maybe read it so that you can communicate with them that way. Repeat or rephrase your comments in clear, simple language. If all else fails, just like what I said, write it down. Write down your questions. All right, people that are visually impaired, tell the patient what's happening constantly. Identifiable noises and describe situations and surroundings because they're going to be afraid. They don't know what's going on. Find out the patient's name and use it throughout your examination and treatment. Also, identify their levelness of sight. Not all visually impaired people are completely blind, folks. Ask them how well they can see, if any. If the patient has a service dog, try to keep the patient and the dog together at all costs. And it's definitely not necessary to talk louder to these folks. They hear just fine. All right, non-English speaking patients. Determine how much English the patient speaks or understands, if any. And then try to find an interpreter. Hopefully somebody's on scene that can help out. Supplement your questions with hand gestures, finger pointing, or facial expressions. Geriatric patients. Don't assume that all older patients have physical or mental impairments. Some are just as sharp as you and I, and they are just fine. Assess all patients carefully and give them the time to respond to your questions. Pediatric patients. You need to understand their growth development stage. And then, of course, kids, the familiar objects and faces can help reduce their fear. So keep people around them and keep their favorite toy together, that kind of thing. Don't take those kind of things away. Talk to the parents and child as much as possible and tell them what's going on. Communication, man. Communicate with them. Ask a parent to hold the child or if the illness or injury permits. It's always very comforting. That's that separation anxiety thing. If the child is not with the parent, they're going to be more afraid. So get them involved as much as possible. Tell the child your first name and explain what you're doing every time you do something before you do it. All right, squat, kneel, or sit down to the child's level. As you can see in this particular photograph, this EMT or first responder is down at the patient level. Be honest with them. If something's going to hurt, tell them that. Tell them, listen, this may hurt a bit, but I'm trying to make it better. All right, so reassure them in communication. Patients with developmental disabilities, there's several out there. Ask the family about what the patient's typical level of communication. What is their level of understanding? How do they communicate? You know, this is your autistic child. This is a child with Down syndrome. Um, Even adults. I mean, you will run into several different folks with special needs. Speak slowly with them using short sentences and simple words. You may have to repeat or rephrase statements several times until the patient understands what you're trying to ask them. Be patient with them. All right, persons displaying disrupt behavior. Assess the situation, try to determine the cause. Why are they disruptive? What's happening? So you got somebody who's very angry, very upset. You know, protect yourself. Protect the patient and yourself. Make sure that you're close to an exit. Don't ever let your patient block your exit. You know, make sure you can get out if you need to. Don't take your eyes off the patient or turn your back on them ever. If the patient has a weapon, stay clear and wait for law enforcement personnel. All right, continued. As soon as your personal safety is assured, carry out appropriate emergency medical care for the patient like you would anybody. You cannot take disruptive patients to the hospital against his or her wishes, so you're going to have law enforcement involved. It can be very difficult, but yet, you can manage it along with the law enforcement. All right, some general medical terminology you need to be familiar with. It is a collection of terms used by medical personnel to identify anatomical parts of the body, specify illnesses and injuries, and also indicate treatments that are given. Your job as a first responder is to communicate your message to other medical providers as clearly as possible. Don't use medical terms you don't know what they mean. Somebody will call you on that. Speak clearly, speak honestly, straightforward, plain language. As new terminology is introduced, look at the parts of each word and then help to understand it. And then ask for clarification if you don't know what it is. You can also work on learning commonly occurred prefixes and suffixes of medical terms. There's a lot of good information out there, including what's in your book. All right, so here's table 5-2. Like I mentioned, prefixes commonly used in medical terminology. It helps to understand these and put them, in your little toolbox in your head, so you know what they are. Brady for slow, tacky for fast, so on and so forth. Good stuff. All right, documentation, really important stuff. We gotta document what we're doing. There is written records or digital records on almost everything that we do in life. Proper documentation includes age and sex of the patient, history of the incident, condition where the patient was found, and the patient's description of the injury or illness. Also, it needs to have the patient's chief complaint, their level of responsiveness, and what is normal for their level of responsiveness. You have the normal level of consciousness and the level of consciousness that you found them in. Status of the initial and subsequent vital signs, if you're doing vital signs, to include blood pressure, pulse, and respirations. The results of any physical examination. And the pertinent medical conditions use sample format. And again, I mentioned that earlier, and it's in your book. Signs and symptoms, allergies, medications, past medical history, last meal, and events leading prior to. That's what sample means. And then finally, the treatment that you gave the patient. Let's talk about some more. All right, if there's any changes in the patient condition, it needs to be noted as well. The agency and the personnel who took over your treatment. And then you need to add the times to it. The time you were dispatched, the time that you arrived, the time that the other providers arrived on the scene, and the time that you departed the scene. Also, proper documentation includes any reportable conditions. Remember we talked about those earlier. Dog bites, human bites, domestic abuse, domestic violence, those kind of things. Any infectious disease exposure that you may have had. Anything unusual about the case or any other helpful facts. Bottom line, complete your patient care report as soon as possible after each call. Otherwise, you're going to forget things. It's important that we get that information down as soon as possible before we forget them, because all of it's going to count, especially if you end up, being required to present this case in a court of law in front of your quality improvement process. All right, so in summary, we've got 5 slides here talking about summarization. Communications, what the systems are and how they will allow you to relay information from one location to another. You need to understand and have a basic idea how your departmental communication system works, whether it's portable based, mobile based, combinations of thereof, that kind of stuff you need to know. You got to be familiar with two-way radio communications and have a knowledge of mobile and handheld radios and when to use them and how to use them. You also need to understand the different functions, the different phases of the EMS call to include dispatch, response to the scene, arrival at the scene, updating responding units, and then transferring cares, and then post-run activities. It's important for you to learn and follow these standard procedures and protocols used by your department's communications division. And then in addition to radio and oral communications, you must have excellent person-to-person communication skills. Remember, our business is about dealing with people, sometimes in their very worst moment in their life. So you need to be really good at it. Body language and attitude, very, very important stuff. And then, of course, you need to take special care of any of these individuals, to include children, geriatric patients, hearing impaired, anybody that has any special disabilities. Finally, along with your radio report and oral report, you need to complete a formal written handoff report that's going to be given to the EMS professionals that take over the care. All right, let's do our review. All right, so as a review, the requirement of this program on every single case, on every PowerPoint, there are 21 lectures in this particular series. We have at the end of each one of these lectures, you have a review. So read each review question carefully. Then pause the video as necessary to read the questions. It's okay, you can pause it. Then I want you to open your email and type in the following information: your name, the chapter number that you're responding to, the question number that you're responding to, and the answer of that question, A, B, C, or D. And then you must give me a short rationalization for the question. Why is that answer correct? What is the information that you've learned that supports that answer? And then finally, you need to send it to or email it to us at student@emets.net. It's right up here for you. Here you go, student@emets.net. So let's take the first question. When communication with a sick or injured person, it is important to A, use terms such as dear and buddy when addressing the patient. B, only use medical terminology. C, ask the patient as little as possible. D, maintain eye contact with the patient when you can. Which of the following would be considered good communication? A, you talk louder so you can be heard over the television. B, you initiate care without telling the patient what you're doing. C, you assess the patient while thinking about your last call. D, you minimize the distractions during your conversation with the patient. When caring for a pediatric patient, you should consider A, separating the child from the parents to avoid upsetting them. B, speaking in an authoritative tone. C, allowing the parent to hold the child if the situation permits. D, performing painful decisions without giving the child any warning. Okay, folks, that's the end of this lecture. We want to thank you for your participation in the program overall. Again, if you have any questions for your instructor, please email them to student@emets.net, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.